With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
And good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us, whether you're joining us on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, Twitch, however you're listening to us. We certainly appreciate you being with us here on Tactics. I'm Caleb Colquitt, as you all know, and we actually have a pretty big breaking story right now. For those of you who have been paying attention to the local news cycle here in Alabama, you'll be aware that something pretty, I don't know about unprecedented, but has certainly grabbed the public interest recently. And it will come as no surprise to you because the person that has been attacked in this is someone who has been a longtime friend of the program, was a regular guest from Eagle Forum, Alabama, that always kept us up to date on what was going on in the state House and Senate. And so we'll go ahead and bring her on right now. Becky Gerritson, good afternoon.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thank you for agreeing to come on the air with us. In fact, I think this is actually your first interview since this whole thing broke, is it not?
It is, and thank you for reaching out. I appreciate the opportunity.
Always a pleasure to have you on the program. So just to give everybody sort of a background on this, and you can jump in and correct me if I get any of this wrong, but I'll just give kind of a brief summary of what happened. So the other day, a publication on the internet called Alabama Today, they came out with a piece talking about how Becky Gerritson had gone out of her way specifically to try to silence the voice of another talk radio personality here in the state of Alabama, actually right here in Montgomery. And one thing that I do want to sort of clarify here, this is going outside that story for just a second. I have a general rule that I don't talk about my competitors. I just kind of let them do their thing and do my thing. I've been broadcasting now for almost 4 years, and I have never once ever mentioned any of the people that were on the other station here in Montgomery. It's not, that I was avoiding it, but now they're actually in the news, and so that's the only reason that I'm bringing this up. It's Baron Coleman, who's over on one of the competing news talk stations here in the capital city. And the allegation was essentially that you two got into a fight over the medical marijuana bill. That Eagle Forum, Alabama's official position was that they were against this bill from legalizing medical marijuana use in the state of Alabama. Baron Coleman was very in favor of it and was very vocal about that. And after that took place, some things were exchanged, and because Baron Coleman is basically the Alex Jones of the capital city, he said a lot of crazy, outrageous things, including insulting you, calling you, one of the things the article mentioned was a whore for Big Pharma. I mean, just outlandish, ridiculous stuff that has no place in our political dialogue. But anyway, that's what happened. And the allegation was in response to this, because you didn't like what he was saying, that you actually went after Baron Coleman's law license and tried to get him disbarred, because of course he's an attorney on top of being a talk show host. And yeah, I using the phrase attorney pretty loosely. But anyway, so being an attorney, that you in Eagle Forum, Alabama actually went after and filed a bar complaint against him, trying to get him disbarred, trying to get him unable to perform his job, which was reminiscent of, and again, we're just going by the article here, is reminiscent of things like Media Matters does, where they go after sponsors and try to get someone deplatformed just because they don't like the positions they take. And the article essentially alleges that you are a hypocrite because you're somebody that has for a long time stood up for smaller government, free speech, having that free exchange in the battlefield of ideas. And specifically just recently, you remember that we talked about this for 2 or 3 weeks on end about the campus free speech bill not having safe spaces where people could just not say things you disagree with. And so they were essentially attacking that you were not really a principled small government constitutionalist kind of conservative, that when somebody said something unflattering or nasty about you, that because you merely didn't like them, that you in Eagle Forum, Alabama went after Baron Coleman's livelihood and tried to get it to where he couldn't make a living anymore. So that was kind of the angle. Did I miss any angle that they talked about or any important detail you want to bring up here?
No, I think that was a pretty good summary of their side of the story.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I just wanted to bring you on and give you a chance to kind of respond and sort of, because I want to hash this out, because I think that it's very important, not just for our political adversaries, but especially for our political friends, that when they do make a mistake or an error in judgment, that we call them out on that. And so if you had, made some kind of error, I think that it's part of being a good friend to somebody that you lovingly correct them. But I don't know if that's true. I wanted to get both sides of this and sort of hear the story from your position, see if any important details were left out, because I take pretty much everything Alabama Today says with a grain of salt, and I pretty much believe that about 95% of everything out of Baron Coleman's mouth is a lie. So needless to say, they were not reliable sources, and I've known you long enough to give you the benefit of the doubt in a situation like this, so I kind of want to hear your take on all of this.
Well, I thank you so much for even just asking, hey, what's going on here? Did you really say these things? Did you do these things? Because I have noticed a lot of people just jump to the conclusion from this one-sided story that I have done these things, which I have not done. So I prepared a response today. And Caleb, I would really like to read it if I could, because it explains everything. So if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
I will start.
By all means.
Alabama Today posted an article. Alabama Today posted an article yesterday entitled "Tea Party Activist Becky Gerritson versus Baron Coleman: An Absurd Fight Against His First Amendment Rights." The Gerritson versus Coleman issue has nothing to do with freedom of speech or the U.S. Constitution. It doesn't even primarily have to do with Coleman's offensive language towards women. What it does have to do with is holding people accountable when they go on public airways and make false statements in order to hurt an organization. After reading the Alabama Today article, it is clear that neither the author nor Mr. Coleman himself recognizes why an Alabama bar ethics complaint was filed against him and why he should be held accountable for false statements. I'm Becky Gerritson, the Executive Director of Eagle Forum of Alabama. Eagle Forum is a Christian pro-family organization that upholds conservative principles like limited government, lower taxes, personal responsibility, and we promote public policy that protects and strengthens the nuclear family. How the fight began. On May 28th, I testified before the Alabama House Health Committee against SB 236, the bill to legalize medical marijuana. I testified at the public hearing because there were several problems with the bill, which I identified in my testimony, and then offered ways to make the bill better. Later that night, WSFA, Montgomery's NBC affiliate, showed a clip of me testifying for a few seconds, although you could not hear my testimony. The next day, May 29th, Baron Coleman, the host of News and Views radio show, went on the air and lied about what I said in my testimony. He said that I said there were no known benefits to medical marijuana and it leads to like black tar heroin. I said nothing of the sort and actually praised the current cannabis oil trial at UAB and recommended extending it. Not only did Coleman lie about my testimony, but he also proceeded to call me a big pharma whore multiple times. The next day, May 30th, Coleman continued his rant and promised, in quotes here, his listeners that Eagle Forum was taking money from Big Pharma for my testimony. Again, completely baseless and false. It's one thing for comments to be offensive, like calling a woman a whore. I can handle that. But the more significant issue is having to endure completely baseless and false statements that disparage our organization. Mr. Coleman's false statements matter. Eagle Forum is a nonprofit organization. We rely solely on donations from our supporters to fund the work we do to protect and strengthen families and promote our conservative values. We work diligently to research issues and create policies based on facts. So when a radio host broadcasts on the air that we have said things we haven't, and then falsely states that we are paid by Big Pharma or any other interest group for the position we took on an issue, it is my right and my duty to stand up for truth and call out the lies. So that's what I did. Now, why file an ethics complaint? Attorneys in Alabama have ethics rules they're required to abide by. Barron's words and actions violated Alabama's Bar Misconduct Rule 8.4. Let's be clear. Filing an ethics complaint is not the same as trying to take away someone's law license. I'm not known as a vengeful as a person, nor am I the kind of person who tries to destroy someone with whom I disagree, but I am compelled to stand up to injustice. The Bar complaint was a private matter and was never intended to remove Coleman from practicing law, but rather a way to hold him accountable. These are the very standards which Mr. Coleman agreed to follow when he became an attorney. The AL Today article claimed that I was trying to silence Coleman. I did alert the radio station owner and Coleman sponsors to his comments with a copy of his own words. Because Eagle Forum is an advocate for free speech, we intentionally did not call for a boycott nor make public comments. I just wanted them to know that he was spreading false information about Eagle Forum under their name. It was clearly their decision on whether to continue to support his show. Will Coleman react on the air to the ethics complaint? When Coleman found out that I had filed the bar complaint, he then went on the air and publicly threatened me. The following venomous rant was due to our privately calling out his false statement. The audio is worth listening to because the tone reveals so much. He goes on for 3 minutes, but here are just some of the choice words about me that he said on the air. I'm going to destroy this bitch. I'm going to absolutely destroy her.
Becky.
I'm sorry.
I know that's what he
Yeah,
said,
you
and I
got
know
that?
you're just quoting, but, family show.
Okay. Her life will never be the same. I'm going after her. I'm going after her organization. I'm going after her national organization. I'll lose everything destroying your life. I'll lose absolutely everything in search of making sure your life is hell. 14 different chapters will be sued. Her life will be over. She will be begging me to go away in due time. I'm smarter than you guys are, and I will blanking destroy you and everything you hold dear. If you threaten me, I will burn your DAMN house to the ground. An hour later, he made more threats. Here are just a few of those statements. Quote, but when you come after me, I come after you 10 times as hard, and I will never give up. I'm just warning you, I will never give up. You can pay me to go away, but short of that, I will never go away. I never, ever, ever give up, and I win. Now, please note that Mr. Coleman said that he himself could be paid to go away. Again, the next day, he continued threatening to destroy me and Eagle Forum. Some choice words from that rant include, there's going to be some real fireworks across the state in the near future. Someone's proud organizations are going to be brought completely to their knees and bankrupted. Someone, a great conservative activist around here, will be brought completely to their knees and bankrupted, destroyed and humiliated, because that's what I do. I don't around. You step into the ring with me, I will destroy you, period. Barron's hateful, arrogant response confirmed to me that the original ethics complaint I filed was just. The reporter got it wrong. Eagle Forum did not take money. Eagle Forum stands for truth, and the principles of Eagle Forum are not for sale. In the AL Today article, author April Marie Fogel says that if you Google Big Pharma in Eagle Forum, you will see a fundraising event reported by the Huffington Post, which claims that Eagle Forum took money from Big Pharma. However, the groups which did that fundraiser call themselves Phyllis Schlafly's Eagles and Eagle Forum Education Fund, both of which are run by Ed Martin. Neither Eagle Forum of Alabama nor Eagle Forum nationally had any affiliation whatsoever with either of those organizations, nor the event which they reportedly sponsored. Not surprisingly, other information in that Huffington Post article is also incorrect. To reiterate, Eagle Forum of Alabama has not received any money from pharmaceutical companies. I am certainly not the first conservative Mr. Coleman has vowed to destroy, and I'm sure I won't be the last. I am disheartened that even in Alabama, civil discourse has succumbed to swearing, name-calling, character assassination, lies, and more. It's especially damaging when it happens between people who are supposed to be on the same side. I truly hope that conversations on news and views will be more positive in the future. The end.
Well, that answered actually a lot of the questions that I had about this situation. The first one was, you got to it as soon as I heard it. It strikes me as odd that somebody that is claiming the moral high ground and being the real principled one is the one that's saying, but if you grease my palms, I'll go away. Like, that's not like the Apostle Peter wouldn't have said, like, I will never denounce Jesus Christ. Well, unless I get some money, and then I'll do. Like, that's not something that somebody with the moral high ground does. But anyway, I did have a couple of questions that I do think that this opens up to. what is the standard for an ethics complaint to the bar? Like, what policy specifically that do you believe that his rant on the radio actually violated? What was the nature of the ethics complaint specifically?
I don't have it pulled up right in front of me, but you can Google it. But it is misrepresentation, falsely saying things, poor conduct. I can't remember all of the words that are involved in that, but it is.
Okay.
You can just Google Alabama bar complaint, Rule 8.4.
Okay. All right. Well, I do wish that you had that with you, but I was just curious because I wanted to, get a little bit more into the meat and potatoes of exactly where this complaint was coming from to kind of illustrate,
Well,
you know.
I brought this to my leadership and said, hey, this is what is being said about us, and what are we going to do about this? And we have legal counsel, and we actually have two attorneys that were with us during this time and that are with us all the time. But and one suggested, I think this is very appropriate for a bar complaint.
Okay.
So that's why we did that.
So in other words, it was another lawyer who was familiar with.
Yes, it was
Okay.
legal counsel that advised we do that.
Yeah. Okay. So that does also kind of poke a hole in the theory that the immediate response from y'all was, okay, he's saying things we don't like. How can we figure out a way to keep him from being able to make a living? I mean, if it was actually your
Right.
legal counsel that was suggesting
Oh,
that,
right.
yeah, that makes that
Yeah,
makes a big
and
difference.
Another point I really want to bring up too is because this, Mr. Coleman thinks that I'm out to destroy. Well, he's stating, of course, that I'm out to destroy him and disbar him and boycott his sponsors and all of that. And this was all done very quietly. We did not make any public comments about this. We did not. It was not our intention, nor is it now, to ruin him. We are advocates for free speech. I did write his sponsors and ask that they carefully review everything and kindly review their support. I did not threaten. There was no anger. There was nothing public about this. But yesterday, Barron decided to make this all public, to make the bar complaint public, to go forward and, I guess, let us have a big circus, obnoxious spectacle for all to see and laugh at. But, when if you know me, it is not my intention to destroy anyone. And I do not wish ill upon him, but I will stand up when I am being lied about. And when our organization that works very hard to have a good reputation, it's important that we speak out when we need to.
So that actually plays to one other thing that I was going to ask about, which it's almost more of a rhetorical question. I've known you for a number of years, and Barron is certainly not the first person to go after you politically because you had a difference of opinion on a particular issue. And I mean, you've been called, I've seen it personally, worse things than this. And it wouldn't really make sense if you were just somebody that went out and tried to shut down everybody that disagreed with you. It seems like, I mean, all the years that you've been in the public eye, that it's all of a sudden just now you decided to start doing that. Like that's another thing that really raised my alert that maybe there was more to this than meets the eye. And so that just seemed odd to me that somebody like you that's been seeing these attacks for years just now all of a sudden decided, okay, I'm going to ruin people that disagree with me. That doesn't,
Oh, no. Well, and this was, I am now the executive director of a statewide organization. This is a bigger organization. This was a public testimony. This was something that was, I was accused on the air of doing these things. And I just cannot let our statewide organization stand by and let someone talk like that.
So my question is, and I know that neither one of us are attorneys, but it seems to me that this a different way to go about this, and perhaps even the better way, would be to file an actual defamation case. So instead of an ethics complaint to the bar, like actually going through the process of filing some kind of slander suit. And I'm confused. Was that option ever discussed or?
No. This was going to be a a way to hold him accountable,
Okay.
or the least damaging way to hold him accountable for what he says on the air. And you know what? It's really not that big of a deal. I mean, he signed up when he was an attorney to abide by these rules. So this is on him. Whether the bar could say, hey, there's nothing here, no problem, that's fine. But this is the step we wanted to take. We didn't have in our minds to sue him, although that's what he has said. He's going to sue all 14 chapters and is ready to service papers, but I haven't seen those yet.
Yeah, he's been
it wouldn't surprise me. It would not at all surprise me.
Now, you probably didn't know this about me, Becky, and that's because I've never said anything about it on the air publicly at all. But Baron Coleman threatens to sue people all the time. He's threatened to sue me before. So, I mean, I wouldn't take that too seriously, honestly. If you have time, I'll give you the story real quick.
Well, you know what? Let's not, because I am really not here to disparage him. I'm just here to, and I know you're not trying to either.
No, I'm not. I'm not trying to destroy the guy. I'm really not.
You know what? I just, this is in the Lord's hands, and I know he's going to use it for our good, and we are trying to respond in the best way we can, and we will continue to do the work that we can, and the work that we love to do to make families stronger. And so, people can judge character many ways, and I think people will see what's the right way to have civil discourse and what's the wrong way. Well, and I wish there were more people in America these days that would want to take the high road.
Well, and that's one thing that I kind of want to ask as a parting thought here. When it comes to this, honestly, I am still a little skeptical of the talking to sponsors, just because even though me being a minister especially, would in no way endorse any of the things that he said about you, or even said about things about people that I don't like. But at the same time, I don't like going after the sponsors. That's the thing that really bothers me. But I will say that there is a strong difference in the attitude that you and Eagle Forum Alabama have adopted versus an organization like Media Matters, because you can tell Media Matters is out for blood. I mean, they want to destroy a person's life. And everything that I've gotten from you since we started this interview was, we didn't want him to say things that were untrue about us, and that could hurt your organization, it could hurt your donations later, which you depend on heavily since you're a nonprofit. But at the same time, you're not trying to get him thrown out of polite society and he'll never again be able to speak publicly and be taken seriously. Like, there is a real difference in the end goal, and I think that that's really where the difference the difference ought to be considered in the two approaches.
Well, and I will just, this is going to be, I think, in one of there's more news on this. I think AL.com is getting ready to do an article, and I know that AL today got a copy of one of the sponsor letters. So if I could just read to you what I said to the sponsors, so you can see that it is not trying to take them off the air.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
It's very simple. It just says, my name is Becky Gerritson. I'm the executive director for Eagle Forum of Alabama. I have attached a letter written by our president, Mrs. Uni Smith, to Rick Peters, the owner of Blue Water Broadcasting, explaining our concerns with the News and Views radio show, which you sponsor. The host, Baron Coleman, made some disparaging remarks that we believe you should be alerted to, as your sponsorship helps keep them on the radio. We would appreciate your review of the letter and corresponding radio transcript. After doing so, we would kindly ask you to then reevaluate your support of News and Views, as it could reflect on your reputation as well. Your money might be better served on other news talk shows like the Dan Morris Show, Happy Hour Show with Greg Bedell, or Joey Clark Radio Hour. I appreciate your careful consideration. Would be happy to answer any questions you have about this issue. I can be reached at blah, blah, blah. So, we were not threatening them. We were not saying, we're going to call everybody and tell them to boycott your establishment. And we just said, here's what was said. Please review. And, if you decide not to support them, then here's some other radio shows that are doing a great job talking about the issues. So to me, that was I was trying to be as kind as I could, but also to alert them to what was going on.
Let me play devil's advocate here for just a second.
Okay.
Could you not make the argument, especially since we're both very pro First Amendment people, Could you not make the argument that the better way to handle it would have been to come out, make a public statement against Coleman himself instead of talking to his sponsors that, have the marketplace of ideas and just let the public and the people that hear you hash it out decide who was actually correct in that?
That's an option. And if it wasn't Baron Coleman, that might have been a way to do it. But I know Baron, I have dealt with him before. You see the hatred and venom coming out of him just by filing a complaint. There's more on his Facebook page right now. I'm white trash. And, I don't think for us that was the way to go. I think it was just to say, hey, here's what's happening on the shows you sponsor. We'd kindly ask you to reevaluate. And you know what? Baron came on the show and said, he reached out to his sponsors and they all love him and are continuing their support. So that's fine. That's fine.
That's capitalism.
So I don't know what the big problem is now. He's all his well, not all of them, because one of them actually did call me and say they had serious problems. But anyway, I thought this was just the best way to do it. So.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I understand the rationale behind that, because I wasn't even talking about necessarily going and confronting him one-on-one. I just meant kind of making a public statement or something like that. But, I get what you're saying. And one thing that I would point out to my audience that are paying attention to this, you'll notice that at no point has Becky brought up any names or talked about any specific, sponsors that are on the show. In fact, I can tell you've gone out of your way to avoid doing that. So, it is a very different methodology, and I do appreciate that. But, I don't know. I just, I understand where you're coming from. I think that I still probably would have handled it a little differently. I probably would have just, but one thing that's different about you and me is I also have a talk show that's my personal forum every day. So
right.
That is a little different,
right.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate you coming on the show and giving us your side of the story. I feel like we're all a lot better informed about the context in which this all took place and the actions that were taken. Now, before I go, sorry, did you have something else to say on this?
I was just going to say, if anybody, only got half of that or they missed it, if they go to alabamaeagle.org, just scroll down our homepage. It's one of the blog posts. You'll see, it kind of, they scroll by. So you'll see the blog post as a response to the AL Today's article. So you can read the whole thing that I read on the air.
Right. Okay. Last.
I'm sorry, you were going to ask me something.
Yes, I do have a question, and I'm sure that you aren't going to answer me, but I'm going to ask anyway because it's my job. I'm sure that you've heard that Martha Roby announced she is not running in 2020. Is there even a chance that Becky Gerritson runs to take that seat?
We are certainly praying about it. So
that is the best answer I could expect.
Time, but yes, we are definitely praying about it.
All right. Well, yeah, that's as good an answer as I was expecting, honestly. And there's no better thing that you can do than to pray about it on a decision that's big. But whatever decision you make, we're going to support you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it, and have a great rest of the show.
All right. Thank you, Becky. We appreciate it.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Becky Gerritson of Eagle Forum, Alabama. And I do appreciate her coming on. Like I said, this was actually her first interview since all this took place. So kind of a big deal that we've been able to get her side of the story and hear what's going on that. Somebody that I've known for a number of years and I trust. My final thoughts on this, I really do. Personally, I don't like the fact that they got in contact with the sponsors. It's not how I would have handled it. Do I think it's morally wrong? No. Do I think that they were trying to deplatform him or get him to where his show was no longer on the air? No, I don't get that sentiment at all from Becky. And you can tell, I'll let you be the judge. That's the reason that I wanted to hear both sides of the story and actually have her on to tell her side. You can be the judge of that. You heard her demeanor. You heard her response. The decision's up to you. And I think that I've made mine. That I would have taken a different approach. But I don't think that anything that they did was immoral. I don't think that they were trying to silence Baron's speech. And I don't think that she or the people at Eagle Forum, Alabama are hypocrites for issuing an ethics complaint. And she is right that one of the problems with the approach that I just presented, actually meeting him on the battlefield of ideas, is that with Barron, that's not an option that works often. And Becky's known him and probably had more interaction with him even than I have. And I won't go into some of the gory details, but Barron has no room to stand on some kind of moral platform. Even if I did disagree with Becky's approach and believed everything that article, the original article that came out about her, was alleging was right, and that she really didn't believe in free speech, even if that were true, I would have to repudiate Becky for doing that and say that she was wrong for doing that. I don't believe that that's in order based on the explanation I just heard. But even if it were, Barron has no ground to stand on saying that, oh, I'm this great champion of free speech, because he's tried to shut me down. He's tried to shut other talk show hosts down. He has done so through underhanded means and even threatened people with physical violence. And so, regardless of how you feel about that, Barron has no room to stand up as though he's some kind of great moral example that believes in free speech. But that's all I'll say about that. I won't get into any details. I don't want to disparage his character. I'm just saying that he doesn't really have room to consider himself the authority or stand up and beat his chest saying that, no, I'm the one that really believes in free speech. Him having a radio show doesn't hurt me. Nor does it hurt Becky. He can do and say whatever he wants. This is a free country. But I think that based on the commentary that you've heard here today and some of the context that you've gotten from that, you understand that just because he's allowed to say whatever he wants doesn't make what he's saying profitable, edifying, or in any way a good idea. We'll go to a break and we'll be back in just a moment.
Hey, where you going? Champ? Slugger? Hey, cowboy. Where you going? Where you going?
I'm going out!
Hey y'all, I am on I-85 heading south, coming back from the loveliest village on the plains back to Montgomery. And part of the reason that I wanted to talk about this is because I just got back from Auburn judging a parliamentary procedure contest. One of the things that it teaches young people is the art of debate. And because I was judging that and because I was thoroughly impressed with a lot of the kids that I saw today, it really made me appreciate it, made me think about what an integral part of being able to debate a topic is to a person's education. And it's the really intelligent young people that are able to engage in this contest. It's a very difficult contest. You don't even know what the subject is going to be until 1 minute before the contest starts. And so you have about 60 seconds to, in your mind, come up with 4 debates, whether this topic is a good idea or a bad idea, and you have to be able to think on your feet, and you have to be able to debate back and forth with your teammates. It's an incredibly difficult contest, even though, as a general rule, there aren't a lot of people that go through this contest that continue to use the rules of parliamentary procedure later in life. And I'm sure some do with their local churches or small organizations like that that actually use Robert's Rules of Order. Really what the contest teaches is the art of debate. You have to be able to think on your feet. You have to be able to very quickly come up with compelling arguments and to form your ideas and your thoughts about a topic into a coherent piece of thought and convey that to other people in such a way that it convinces them to side with you. And I was thinking about this, and this is a contest that you can't participate in until you get to at least the 9th grade. And it really made me sit down and think about how criminal it is that we don't teach our students debate much earlier. But there was a time where a staple of Western thought, that if you were an educated person in the West, you were started on debate at a very early age. In fact, it was not at all uncommon for somebody to be well-versed in the art of rhetoric, well-versed in the art of persuasive speech. From a very early age, it was one of the very first things that they taught. In ancient Greece, for example, going all the way back to the birth of Western civilization, they started you on that when you were about 5. They started you on geometry, of all things, and rhetoric. And the reason for that, the rationale for that, was that it was important because it taught you how to think critically. In other words, if you were involved in rhetoric and you had to learn how to put your thoughts together that quickly, and you had to challenge ideas and sometimes even take the opposite side of the position that you actually held on an issue, it taught you those really critical thinking skills. And because of that, the rest of your education was easier, because nothing teaches you a subject like having to defend it against attack, or the opposite, having to attack it and finding the places where the thinking is flawed or where the ideology needs some improvement. And so because of this, this was a staple of Western civilization really up until about 100 years ago. And it's part of the reason that the education system worked so well for so long. For the longest time, our students had to not only learn material, but had to stand up and defend it, or stand up and be critical of it. And that really helped them understand and absorb the material. And furthermore, because they started out with that first and developed their critical thinking skills, the rest of their education was more robust because they had those critical thinking skills and those problem-solving skills to begin with. So it made a real difference in our education system, and it's something that I believe is sorely lacking, something that we need to bring back. And another bit of social commentary on this is that when it comes to the stereotypical characteristics of some people in my generation and the generation after it, Generation Z, what do you typically think about? They have a hard time taking criticism. They don't like hearing ideas that are not shared by them. There are things that they say is actually violent or harmful to their health to hear ideas that they disagree with. Well, the reason that that wasn't the case for the longest part of Western civilization is because we took on the idea that you ought to have to defend your own ideas, that ideas ought to be observed critically, and that you should have to go through and test whether or not something was true or not. That's really not the way education works now. They give you facts that they say are true and then expect you to just sort of regurgitate them on the test. That's not an education. That's memorization. And there's nothing wrong with memorization. Memorization is great. I'm an advocate of it. But it's not the same as having to defend your ideas.
And welcome back, all. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for our guest, Becky Gerritson, for being willing to come on the program, give her side of the story. Eagle Forum, Alabama, great organization. And we certainly do wish her all the best. Thank you so much for being with us today. Now, the women's soccer team, you remember, it became a big hoopla. Everybody was talking about it. Well, not actually the game of soccer, just that they were constantly whining about how, oh, well, we're not getting paid as much as the men. It became this big feminist story, and everybody had to have their opinion on it. People on the right, people on the left, everybody was talking about how either this was a load of nothing or it was completely unfair and it's a symbol of the patriarchy. And so it seemed like, at least in the national news media, that everybody was focused on this sort of in the peripheral. So it was never the big news story of the day, but pretty much everybody had it as their like C or D segment. And it kept going. Apparently the story still has not died. But here's an interesting twist on it that you'll notice that a lot of conservative media is talking about quite frequently. Left is kind of leaving this one alone, and it's easy to see why. So the organization that runs the women's soccer team, they actually had somebody, and I think that, I don't know if they do this every year, or they did it specifically because of what happened this year with everybody asking about how much their athletes were being paid and saying that the women were making so much less, and so it's not fair. You already heard our arguments about this. You already heard everybody else's arguments about this, about how the men do rake in an awful lot more money than the women. And I believe it was 13 times more. Oh no, it was Well, I tell you what, I'm not going to try to do statistics just off of memory, especially from several weeks ago, because I'll probably get them wrong. But it was a ridiculous level that the women were not even pulling in $1 million, and the men were pulling in, I believe it was over a little bit over $1 billion. So, I mean, it was just a ridiculous level of difference. Well, it turns out they looked at the books and actually had a third party independent financial firm look at the overall cost versus revenue. And it turns out the organization that oversees the U.S. women's soccer team lost money this year. Yeah, even though they won the tournament, lots of publicity, and I don't really care about soccer one way or the other, to be perfectly honest, so it matters little to me. But of course, it mattered a lot to them, and there were people in the country that it did matter to. Despite all of that, still lost money this year. And what this study also showed is that based on the number of matches, if they had 20 matches in a year compared to the men's U.S. team, they found out that even if that were to take place, the women would still be being grossly overpaid versus the amount that they would be bringing in. And so the amount that people are going to pay to see the team now, this is kind of insane. And I didn't expect this, honestly, because you're looking at a team that didn't even qualify for the World Cup, that people would still be willing to pay money to see them more so, and many, many, many times more so, than they would the U.S. soccer team. Because women's soccer, just like most women's sports that there's a male version of, is just not all that popular. There's some sports where women actually are more popular. Look at gymnastics, a perfect example, equestrian. But when it comes to soccer, it is abundantly clear that people just are not interested. And in America, they're not even really interested in men's soccer, but they're certainly more interested in that than they are the women's soccer. And so it really does go to show that you really need to evaluate yourself, regardless of who you are. Man, woman, doesn't matter. If you're about to complain about something, especially about a job that makes you a multimillionaire, you should probably crunch some numbers and do some research on it before you make that your battle cry and the hill that you're going to die on. Because we already, just from the information that we already had based on the money that they raked in for World Cup appearances, men versus women, we already knew that there was a really big gap between that level, and that was the reason that the male athletes are paid so much more. But I don't think even we expected, or at least I don't know any conservative that expected it to be so bad that the men are actually providing for the women. How's that for the patriarchy? What's hilarious about this, because if the women are losing money, but are still getting paid and are still millionaires, and that same organization oversees the men, then that money came from somewhere. And what does that mean? That means that the salaries of the women were provided by the men's team. I find that hysterical. I don't know what percentage of it was, because obviously the women make some money. They just don't make enough to justify their salaries and the amount that they're being paid. But that means at least part of their salary, some of it was at least subsidized by the earnings of the men's team. I find that hysterical. That they can talk about being fierce, independent women that don't need a man, but actually, yeah, they do, because that's where their money is really coming from, is the performance of the men's soccer team. It's all quite amusing. And I have to admit, this is the most fun that I've ever had talking about soccer. In fact, sad as this is probably the most fun anyone has ever had talking about soccer. Unless you're talking about MK over at Sports Radio 740. For some reason, she really likes it. All right. Let's go ahead and go to, I know we're doing it a little early today, but let's go to the daily dose of stupid.
No, you messed it up. You're stupid.
Well, speaking of whiny, ungrateful women that love to pretend that they're victims, today's daily dose of stupid is about Ilhan Omar. So, they put out a video of Ilhan Omar. She's speaking at this conference, and I'll tell you a little bit of background on that because it makes it more impactful. But she's speaking at this conference, and now this put together a video of her answering a biased question. That's how they phrase it. And I'm going to show the whole thing. It's a little bit long. It's about 3 minutes. So for a news clip, that's really long. But watch the whole thing. I promise it's worth it. And I want to give Ilhan Omar every opportunity. I want to give her as much grace to be understood in the context in which it was presented. And you'll notice that now this does do a little bit of editing. But it's important to note in this that now they have a habit, and have for a very long time, of basically putting together pro-Democrat, pro-left propaganda pieces and trying to put them in a format in such a way that it makes you think that it looks like it's sheerly informative, and the stylistically, it kind of looks like a video that somebody would post about, cute baby goats playing with each other or whatever, which I'm not saying that they shouldn't do that. From a business perspective, it's smart. Because instead of doing the big desk with the coffee mugs with the different network logos on them, instead of doing that, they give you just little sound bites of Democrats saying things that they think are good and make Democrats look good. But essentially, the important thing to note here is they're very much in the pocket of the DNC. They're very much in the pocket of the American left. They try to sort of put these videos together to make it seem like they're trying to be objective and they're just human interest stories, but they're really not. And in this one, they're really not even trying to hide that fact. So, props to them for trying to get more viewers. But if you watch this video and you understand the context in which it takes place, it puts it in a whole different light. So go ahead, take a look at this. This is Ilhan Omar.
Will you be able to make a statement against FGM? Because that's an issue in Detroit. It would be really powerful if the two Muslim congresswomen, yourself and Rashida, would make a statement on this issue. Thanks.
Your second question is an appalling question because I always feel like there are bills that we vote on, bills we sponsor, many statements we put out, and then we're in a panel like this, and the question is posed, could you and Rashida do this? And it's like, how often should I make a schedule? Like, does this need to be on repeat every 5 minutes? Should I be like, so today I forgot to condemn Al-Qaeda. So here's the Al-Qaeda one. Today I forgot to condemn FGM. So here it goes. Today I forgot to condemn Hamas. So here it goes. Today I forgot, it is a very frustrating question. It comes up. You can look at my record. I voted for bills doing exactly what you're asking me to do. I have put out statements upon statements. There's a bill in Congress. There's a resolution that I am the co-author of that I voted out of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And so I am, I think, quite disgusted, really, to be honest, that as Muslim legislators, we are constantly being asked to waste our time speaking to issues that other people are not asked to speak to, because the assumption exists is that we somehow support and are for, right? No, there is an assumption. So I want to make sure that the next time someone is in an audience and is looking at me and Rashida and Abdul and Sam, that they ask us the proper questions that they will probably ask any member of Congress or any legislator or any politician, and would not come with an accusation that we might support something that is so abhorrent, so offensive, so evil, so vile. What we look for, and what this whole conversation is about, is that not only do we not have internalized fears about what we might believe and how that gets implemented, but but that we also don't have, right, assumptions about what our value basis might be because of where we might come from and who we pray to. And so I would like, not just for you, but for everyone, to know that if you want us to speak as politicians, American politicians, then you treat us as such.
Okay, so that's Ilhan Omar. Now, what's important to note about this, because context matters, if you saw that and saw, okay, well, she gets a little upset that she feels like she has to answer this question over and over and over again, you can kind of see, even if you wind up disagreeing with Ilhan Omar, you can kind of see how that would get tiresome, or how there's people constantly believing that she would support Muslim policies like female genital mutilation, which she was asked about. It's essentially female circumcision, and it's horrific, and it causes all kinds of health problems. Or she would also have issues with, okay, well, people are asking me to denounce terrorism, denounce Al-Qaeda, denounce all these other things every 5 minutes. And so I could see how she would get a little upset about this. But there's an important part of this story that now this conveniently left out. Where was the question taking place? This question was asked of her by a black Muslim woman, and she was doing so at the Muslim Collective for Equitable Democracy group, which is run by a group, that was the name of the conference, which is run by a group called Muslims for Progressive Values. So it's not like, super white Caleb Colquitt went up and asked her, hey, could you denounce female genital mutilation? See, that's what makes this story so different. Because the way that you see it, with all the context stripped away from it, it makes it seem as though some conservative activist was trying to play gotcha with Ilhan Omar. And that's the way that Ilhan Omar took it. But what it ignores is that she was in a room filled with people that are friendly to her cause, that are Muslims themselves, that are liberals themselves. So it's not even like a conservative Muslim. It's somebody that is lockstep with Ilhan Omar politically, probably on pretty much everything. And you'll also notice that if you look at the way she was wording the question, she wasn't trying to present this in such a way that she was trying to catch Ilhan Omar in a moment where she would refuse to condemn FGM. She was saying, well, I think that it would be really powerful for you to have an opportunity to make a statement, you and Rashida, that if you guys would just make a statement against it. She was trying to help Ilhan Omar. She was saying, there are people that are saying that you're for this. This woman seems to believe that Ilhan Omar would be against female genital mutilation. And so she wants to give her the opportunity to denounce it. He's saying, why don't you right here, right now, make a powerful statement against it? She is trying to help Ilhan Omar. This isn't somebody that is trying to draw blood. She was trying to paint Ilhan Omar in a better light and believed that she would go ahead and denounce it, and then got her head bitten off because of it. And so this is what's really interesting about this. It shows that Ilhan Omar knows how to do exactly one thing, regardless of the audience, regardless of who she's talking to. The only thing Ilhan Omar is good at is playing the victim. That even in a room filled with liberal Muslims, she still tries to make the case that I'm being singled out and I'm being discriminated against because I'm a Muslim woman. Even when it's other liberal Muslim women that are asking her questions. You see, that's the thing that's so hilarious about this, that normally, even though I don't buy into it, normally the narrative is that if you are somebody like Ilhan Omar, that you're a minority religion, you're a woman, and you're a minority race, that you're constantly being discriminated against because all the people that you run in contact with don't understand you, or they're intolerant, they're ignorant, and they are asking you to restate Ilhan Omar case, that they just assume that you're actually in favor of Al Qaeda and Hamas and all the other terrorist organizations, and you're in favor of Sharia law and in favor of female genital mutilation. This is a case where the woman asking was about as similar to Ilhan Omar as you could possibly be, and yet she still plays the victim because it's the only thing she knows how to do. The only thing she knows how to do is talk about how victimized she is. And right now, that's hot in the Democrat Party. Because to them, the more victimized you are, the more authentic and the more important your feelings and your political stances are. To them, that's what grants you authority. It's an argument of authority, which is the weakest form of appeal. Out of all the appeals that there are, that's by far the weakest one, an argument of authority. But that's what they're seeking after. They think that that's the only thing that matters, that your opinions don't matter on certain issues if you're not in the community that matters to. So here's the funny thing about that, and that's sort of the mantra of the left right now. So let me get this straight. When you're talking about issues like this, specifically ones like FGM that targets women and harms women but not men, because you can't, despite what the left may tell you about people having other body parts, you don't have a vagina if you're a guy. And so you can't go through this just like a woman can't be circumcised. You can't go through this if you're a man. And so this is an issue that specifically targets women. And yet, the irony in all of this is that they're saying, well, your opinions only matter on these things if you fit into that community. So in other words, you can only really talk intelligently about FGM if you're a Muslim woman, essentially. That unless you are somebody that belongs to that religion and somebody that belongs to the group that it targets, you're the only person that's allowed to speak on it. And someone actually does that and asks them to make a statement. And her immediate reaction is, well, why would you even ask me that? That's discrimination to even ask that question. Okay, well, if we can't get an opinion from anybody that doesn't fit inside the community, and then when you do ask anybody that actually belongs to that community, they bite your head off and say, well, the only reason you're asking that is because of discrimination, then you can't win with these people. There is no way to get an opinion if everybody outside of that community is excluded and everybody inside that community refuses to answer the question. The only solution to that is you don't get an answer. The only possible outcome is nobody gets to answer the question. And the truth is, I think that's exactly the way the Democrats like it. They don't want to answer questions about this stuff because it is rampant in Muslim-controlled parts like the district that Ilhan Omar is from, where there have been thousands of cases of female genital mutilation. Now, I'm not saying that Ilhan Omar supports it, although she didn't actually condemn it in that particular clip. But I'm just saying that you can understand why, at a Muslim conference run by a progressive Muslim group, you have a Muslim woman on the stage talking. You can understand why that venue would be conducive to asking a question like this. For example, even if it were something that had no association with my church whatsoever, and I'm not bashing Catholics, it's just, they have more history than most of the churches in Christianity. If somebody were to stand up on a stage or a conference, if let's say I were doing a panel, basically if I were in the position of Ilhan Omar, and it was at the Christian Conservative Council, which is put on by the Conservative Republicans group or something like that, and I'm a well-known minister, I have a Bible class at the end of every show, and someone at that position stands up and says, so what did you think about the Crusades? Do you really think the media would give me a pass and now this would be making a video of me saying, you shouldn't even ask me that question. I am so tired of having to answer for the Crusades, which, by the way, I honestly am. I do it anyway because I think it's the right thing to do. But I say, and again, that's not even my church. It's just a group of Christians in a different denomination. But nonetheless, I still think that's an important historical topic to address. But do you really think the media would let me get away with, you shouldn't even be asking me that question? Do I have to every 5 minutes give my speech about the Crusades? Just go look at it online. Go look at other states. They would tear me up one side and down the other if I did that. And we all know it. We all know it. And so for Ilhan Omar to decry the question even being asked, it's so transparently stupid. And it's also important to note because she talks about denouncing Al-Qaeda, denouncing Hamas. Let's also remember that at one point Ilhan Omar actually worked for CARE, which was a front group for Hamas. Our own legal system admitted to that. They were an unindicted co-conspirator because there was a flow of money going back between the two. CARE was actually acting as a fundraiser for an actual terrorist group. So yeah, the fact that there might be some people, even though this woman clearly was not one of them, even though there might be some people that look at not all Muslims, but specifically Ilhan Omar and say, I'm not real sure that she is 100% against terrorism. Especially when she supports organizations like the BDS movement, especially when you consider and look back through her history where she trivializes 9/11, or she says that when it comes to Al-Qaeda, people ought to be just as serious and just as fearful of the United States as they are Al-Qaeda, that when you say the word United States, that should drum up the same kind of emotion that it does when you talk about Al-Qaeda. So yeah, there's a reasonable person can look at that and say, I don't know that this woman isn't a terrorist sympathizer. Now, would that be okay to assume that anyone that is a bear of descent or a Muslim holds that stance? No. But when it comes to Ilhan Omar, it is well documented that she has some of these stances. And so with that in mind, it is very important to understand that that is the context in which this takes place. And the thing about this is, Ilhan Omar is honestly kind of terrible at this anyway. I mean, just looking at her history, Ilhan Omar, when she's talking, you'll notice that she does just a handful of things, because if you've ever watched any of her speeches, she has to constantly look down and read everything verbatim. She doesn't have an outline. And I've talked about this on the show before. She reads it right off of a script just like this. She'll look up every once in a while and then it'll go right back, and then she'll keep talking, and then she'll mess up a word and go back and correct the word. You can tell she's reading word for word from a script. And then when she's doing a question and answer session or an interview, you can tell based on the way that she answers, she's giving canned answers. I've been preaching and doing public speaking since I was in the 6th grade. I've been preaching since I was 15. And in those contests, part of the format, part of what you're doing is that after you do your speech, you answer some questions. I've judged this contest at the nationals many times. I've judged it at the state level. I can tell when somebody has a canned answer already in their pocket, that they already have it memorized. They're not thinking. They're not actually responding to the question. They just dip into their pocket, pull that out, and that is the answer that they're providing you with. I've seen it too many times. I know when people are doing it. Maybe there's somebody out there that occasionally gets one over on me, that they're just so good and so smooth and it seems so natural that they can have a canned answer and make it seem as though it's not a canned answer. But for sure, when it is a canned answer, you can tell. You can tell based on her cadence, based on the way that she reacts, that she has an answer already planned, and she comes out and basically performs based on a response to that. And if she gets a question she doesn't like, she plays the victim and avoids it, which is exactly what we saw in this last example. See, she can't think on her feet. She's not witty. And so what she has to do is, when confronted by an answer or a question that she was not expecting, or one that she does not want to give an answer to, all she does is talk about how victimized she is. And in a room full of Democrats, that works because it completely distracts from the fact that she didn't answer the question. And when you look at all that, that really is how Ilhan Omar responds to it. Any question she asks, if you ever watch her in public, she does one of two things. She gives a canned answer, or she plays the victim. That's it. That's the only thing she knows how to do. And honestly, she plays the victim more than she actually gives an answer. But the reason that she gets away with stuff like this all the time is because the media and the Democrats are terrified of her. And the reason they're terrified of her is because they don't want to be seen as somebody that is anti-Muslim or anti-woman. And so the media constantly runs interference for her. And if you look at the way that Now This presented this, the format that they used, the commentary that they gave in the form of text beforehand, calling it a biased question, you can tell why she's able to get away with this. Because nobody in the media is going to touch her, and she's not going to go on the air with a conservative. Never has. Must be nice to have the media in your hip pocket. One other thing that I wanted to bring up today, and it looks like well, I'll tell you what, we're low on time.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Chaplain's Report today comes from the book of 1 Peter, and we're going to go ahead and delve into this. To understand really where I'm coming from here, I think that in so many ways, we have lost who we are as a country, and there's a news story that ties into this. I am not a pop culture person. I think that anybody that watches will tell you I'm pretty good at comic books, and I know a decent amount about movies, but as far as like TV shows, I'm a little bit lost on that, honestly. I don't really delve into that. I'm news and politics for a reason. But this story really jumped out at me. And the reason is because it's a great little microcosm of the way the world thinks and how they view Christians. So there's this girl named Hannah Brown, who is the star of The Bachelorette. Now, I've never seen an episode of the show. I honestly don't understand how it works. I know that it's some kind of dating game show. I don't really understand the format, but I know that I'm just going off of what I got from an article about this. And according to the article that I read, she was talking about one of the guys that she got rid of, one of the guys that she, I guess, voted off the island, to put it in Survivor terms, is a guy that she slept with 4 times. And her response to this, and the reason this is so significant, is because she is somebody, because this wouldn't be surprising to anybody on a reality show, would it? I mean, you hook up with somebody, you decide you don't like them and ditch them the next day. That's kind of par for the course if you're talking about a normal reality show. The reason that this got so much media buzz and the reason people are talking about it is because Hannah Brown is somebody that is quote unquote openly Christian, according to the article that I read. And she's somebody that refers to herself as a Christian, talks about Christianity, and that's what's created so much buzz here. And originally she said that, oh, I've slept with this guy 2 times. Now I've actually slept with him. I'm telling you that actually it happened 4 times. And when she kicked this guy off, it caused kind of a stir because she had already slept with the guy, but apparently had no intention of pursuing him further or marrying him or whatever. And then earlier in this same season, again, going off the article, if anybody wants to give a better description or I'm characterizing it wrong, feel free to tell me, but I don't claim to know a whole lot about The Bachelor. Earlier in that same season, she gave somebody else the boot who did not believe in premarital sex, and they had a very open, very public spat about that, and she specifically said that she believed that he was prideful in doing that. Apparently, abstaining from sex before you're married means that you're proud and haughty and have your nose in the air. I don't really understand how you arrive at that, but again, I don't know anything about the players. I just know what was being told by the article, because I'm not going to. I mean, don't get me wrong. I want to do my research and my due diligence on the show, but I'm not watching The Bachelor just for it. But anyway, she said this, and this is what I really want to get at. She said, I have had sex, and honestly, Jesus still loves me. I am so over being slut-shamed and being felt like that makes me not a woman of faith, because, oh my gosh, I lived my life and made mistakes and sin every single day, and so do you, and so do you, and so do you. I'm also not going to say that me having sex in a windmill was just the scarlet letter on my chest to have. I'm not going to stand here and feel that way, and you're not going to make me feel that way. Couple things here. First of all, there are some people, and I think that this is what she's trying to speak to. There are some people that think that there is sin and then there is sexual sin. And that's like a double super sin. And if you are in any way violating of that particular command in the gospel, then that's way, way worse than doing any of the little sins. Look, any sin, regardless of how small it may seem to a human being, is enough to separate you from God. Because unless you are perfect, unless you keep the law perfectly, and this is an understanding going all the way back into the Old Testament, better explained by Paul in his book of Galatians and Ephesians, one sin is enough to keep you away from God, and it is only by his grace and the blood of his Son that we are able to come back into his presence after having committed that sin and being washed from that sin by his Son's blood. So there's that. And I'm not trying to say that or give any kind of cover to people that think about sexual sin as though it's some kind of super sin that sticks with you your whole life and you can't come back from it. The Scarlet Letter, which she's referencing there, and that's a reference I actually do know because it's literature. The reason the Scarlet Letter was a very unchristian thing to do is that it didn't matter if you repented. It didn't matter if you sought forgiveness or tried to change your ways. The Scarlet Letter stuck with you because you had done something once, and then that stuck with you for the rest of your life. That's not the way the Christian faith works. If you commit a sin, and then you repent of that sin, and by the way, the word repent means a changing of direction, that you're going in one direction and you alter course and go in the other direction, the direction that God wants you to go in. That you've actually had a change of heart and repented of your sin and strived to do better and to get sin out of your life. That's the opposite of what we're talking about in the Scarlet Letter. But the attitude that Brown is putting up here, it is just so incredibly Hollywood, and it's the perfect microcosm of what the world wants Christians to be. You see, the world would rather have Christians be not transformed, but conformed. They would rather somebody live the life of a Christian the way Hannah Brown does, which is she talks about being a Christian, but she lives like everybody else. Christians are apparently, according to her, supposed to just be indistinguishable from everybody else. That you just do whatever you want, sin as much as you want, and Jesus still loves you, so you're good. Apply that principle, since God is alluded to as our Father, apply that principle to your parents. Good parents will love you no matter what you do. Well, my mom or dad will still love me no matter what I do. That is not an excuse to break into their house and steal money from them to fuel my drug addiction. Just to give an example, of course, I would never do that. And I also don't have a drug addiction, but you know what I'm saying. Love does not excuse any behavior. Does Jesus still love somebody that's caught in sin? Absolutely. Does he want them to continue in that sin? No. If you look at the way that he treats the woman in Samaria, the woman in the well, he doesn't come out at her and browbeat her with scripture because she knew what she was doing was wrong. He didn't have to tell her that. She knew the law. She knew the lifestyle that she was living in was not right. But he did bring it to her attention And he did want her to stop that. And you'll notice that the woman caught in adultery. What was the parting shot that he gave when she went on her way? He saved her life. He treated her like she was valuable. He showed her that he loved her. And he ended that exchange with, "Go and sin no more." You see, that's the part of this that is missing. We do not just continue in sin that grace may abound, as Romans 6 will tell us. Would you think of somebody that committed some kind of action against you, whether it was lying to you or injuring you in some kind of way, and you forgave them? But if they kept doing it, if they kept doing it over and over and over again and showed no intention of stopping at all, would you really believe that they were sincere? Now imagine applying that same principle to God, who actually sees into our heart and knows that it's not sincere. See, and that's really the difference. This is what the world wants a Christian to be. To come out to the world and say, "I'm a Christian, I love God, by the way, I'm going to do whatever the heck I want to, not going to listen to anything that the Bible says, I'm just going to live like everybody else and it's just cool. Not going to evangelize, not going to bother anybody." See, at that point, Christianity is meaningless. The power of the gospel is to transform a person from a life of sin to one that is spent constantly trying to subjugate yourself to God's will. That's the difference. The world would love for every Christian to be like Hannah Brown, which is, being a Christian is basically a status on Facebook and nothing more. That you call yourself a Christian, you just kind of look at the pool of religions there and pick out the one that you like, the thing that kind of suits your fancy, the one that's fashionable at the moment, but you don't change anything about your life. And as far as shame, when something incorrect has happened, shame is an appropriate response to that. In fact, I remember that, and I've been going through the Minor Prophets recently, one thing that is consistent throughout the Minor Prophets, and some get worse than others, but the reason that Israel and the southern kingdom needed correction is because they had reached a point that they no longer felt shame. That they no longer even felt bad for doing things against God's will. I think that is really where this young lady is right now. That she has gone so far past feeling any kind of remorse, and you'll see in her statement, that's exactly what she said. "You're not going to make me feel that way." Well, no, nobody can make you feel anything. But if you can say that and confess it on live TV in front of God and everybody and your own family and feel no remorse for having premarital sex, you're not a Christian. Now, if you came at it from the angle of, "Well, I've had sex in the past and I'm trying really hard to stop, and I've done everything in my power to keep that temptation away from me," okay. Doesn't matter how often you have made that mistake, the Christian thing to do would be forgive you. But this attitude of, I have sex whenever I want to, and I am not changing anytime soon, and you're not going to make me feel bad about that. That is somebody that is securely in Satan's warm embrace. And the reason that that person is far more valuable to him than somebody who would be committing the big sins that we would think of is that somebody that everybody despises and everybody dislikes and everybody can clearly see that they're evil, that doesn't bring anybody over from the other side. Somebody that claims Christianity, somebody that claims to be living the way that God wants them to, but lives exactly like everybody else, that's somebody that the devil can use to tempt others. And as attractive a young lady as she is, I can see how that would be the case. So that brings me to the verse of the day, and we'll look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 7 through 10. "This precious value, then, is for you who believe. But for those who disbelieve, The stone which the builders rejected, this became the very cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling, and a rock of offense. For they stumble, because they are disobedient to the word. And to this doom they were also appointed. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of the darkness into his marvelous light. For you once were not a people, but now you are the people of God. You had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Now, that is an awful lot to digest, so I'm going to break it down as succinctly as I possibly can. And it goes along with what we've been talking about. The Christian is supposed to be a peculiar people, a holy nation. What does it mean to be holy? To be sanctified? It means set apart. The word ecclesia, the Greek word for the church, means the called out. The church is to be a group of people that is distinct from the world. Doesn't mean we never interact with them. In fact, we're commanded to interact with them as often as possible. It doesn't mean that we keep our nose up in the air and look down on other people, because that's not what Christianity is about either. But what it does mean is, if people can look at you and look at a non-Christian and can't tell the difference, you're doing something wrong. And that's something that we need to remember, that even though, there's nothing wrong with interacting with people that are not Christians. In fact, it's encouraged in the Bible. There's nothing at all wrong with having fellowship with those who are not members of the faith. There's nothing wrong with, having some engaging in the culture, in the sense that it's not engaging in something that's sinful. That's okay. But when you start moving to a place to where, other than showing up to church an hour or two a week, you could look at the entire rest of a person's week and you wouldn't be able to tell a difference between someone who is a follower of Christ and just your average Joe that doesn't claim any religion. Yeah, well, if that's the case, then you're not a Christian. To be a disciple of Christ means somebody who is disciplined. That's what the word comes from. It means someone that follows in Christ's footsteps. So if it's something that Christ wouldn't do, then you do your best not to do it either. Now, one thing about her statement that is correct is that we do sin. And of course, if there were no sinners that were Christians, then there would be no Christians, because the whole point of Christianity is that it takes sinners and transforms them. But the problem here is, she and so many other people in the world want to claim the label without claiming all the stuff that comes with it. You want to be able to say that you're a person of faith. You want to say that you're spiritual. You want to say that you follow Christ, but none of your actions reflect that. The way that the gospel presents it is somebody that denies what they want, picks up their cross, and follows Jesus. Does this sound like denial to you? Does this sound like somebody that is saying, well, I want this, but God says it's bad for me, so I'm going to forego that in order to try to be a better follower of him, and I'm just going to trust that God knows better than me, and to do the best that I can to do what he has prescribed for my life? Now, this is somebody that is saying, I'm going to do what I want. That's the difference in a holy nation that is talked about here. And the thing is, yes, it's going to offend people. And Peter says this right here in his epistle. He says that we are going to be a rock of offense. That because we are different, because we're set apart, because we're a holy nation, that there are going to be people that are not holy, that are not a part of that nation, that look at us and say, ooh, we don't like those people. That are going to say all kind of manner of evil things against us. Believe me, Peter understood that better than most. This is a man that, according to secular history we have, was killed for his beliefs. Do you really think somebody that lives exactly like everybody else and just claims Christianity as sort of a fashionable accessory, do you really think those people would be killed for their beliefs? No. Peter actually believed it, actually changed his life to try to follow God. And his reward was that he offended a lot of people. He also helped a lot of people. And I just gave a lesson yesterday. Go back and look at yesterday's chaplain's report. It is important that we make our message palatable to people, if at all possible. That we do the best that we can to persuade people, we have good relationships with people. I'm not saying that we don't do that, but you also don't sacrifice the truth. And sometimes the truth offends people. Sometimes telling them the truth that the way that they're living is not correct, that it's hurting them, and that God is not pleased with their lifestyle, that ticks people off. Pete Buttigieg, perfect example of that. Somebody that claims to be a Christian says, oh yeah, I'm a Christian and I love God, and by the way, I'm gay and I live how I want. We're all familiar with the hymn, Just As I Am. And I believe it. Because it's what the Bible teaches. That anybody from any walk of life, no matter how sinful, no matter how backward their life is, can come to God for healing and can say, Lord, just as I am, this is how I'm coming before you. What you don't get to say is, just as I am, and I'm staying that way. That you don't get to do. You come before God, aware of your sin, aware of your own moral failings, and ask Him to correct them. He accepts no less. Doesn't expect you to always be perfect, doesn't expect you to get it right 100% of the time. But He does expect you to do the best that you can to eradicate the sin in your life and to do the things that He's commanded for us to do. The world would rather take the Hannah Brown or the Pete Buttigieg example. Well, I'm going to say that I'm a Christian, but I'm not going to change any part of my life to actually try to live the way that Jesus lived. You can't do it. You can't serve two masters. You can't mix the new wineskin with the old wine and vice versa. Anybody that puts their hand to the plow and looks back is not worthy of Christ. And neither I nor any other Christian gets it right 100% of the time. I don't even know if I'm batting over 500. But the difference is I'm actually trying really hard to make sacrifices, to deny the things that I know God does not want me to do. And this prosperity gospel style of Christianity to where, you just live the way you want to and God will sort it out at the end because He loves you. That's not the message that the gospel gave. That is not the message that Christ gave His own life to bring to other people. Jesus didn't die so you can do whatever you want. Jesus died to sanctify you as a holy priesthood that takes painstaking measures to present themselves a holy and righteous bride before Him so that they can enter into the fellowship of His Father. That's what Jesus died for. And anybody that isn't on board with that can't call themselves a Christian. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2019.